Welcome to this week's episode of Done and Dusted. Joining me tonight are two of Australia's leading family lawyers. We have Darren Mort, barrister, and we also have Joplin Higgins, who, amongst many attributes, has worked extensively as an independent children's lawyer. I'm your host this week, and I'm Counsel, and I too have had a lot of experience working as an independent children's lawyer. Now, Darren and Joplin, you recently had an experience in the Federal Circuit and Family Court of Australia in relation to an independent children's lawyer case. Do you want to talk, first of all, about what is the role of an independent children's lawyer in family law matters?
So an independent children's lawyer role is an extremely important role, Caroline, because what we are is a voice for the child, but we also look at the case really objectively, and we provide evidence to the court that sometimes gets missed by the mother or the father or the parties that are involved in the case. So we play a really important role of making sure that all of the evidence is there in a very forensic role.
So you're really sort of helicoptering around the case and the facts and just working out where some of the holes are, some of the gaps are.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Whilst in the back of our mind at all times is what's in the best interest of the children that we represent. And, we take at times into consideration, what the children want, but other times, we have to make a bit of a forensic call as to what weight we even put on the views that they're telling us. So it's actually a really tricky role, and it takes a lot of dedication in each case, that's for sure.
And Darren, when you're presenting as a barrister, I'm really curious to have the viewers try and understand the difference between what a child might say and instead what you put before the court to help the court make that decision about best interest. Do you come across situations where the child might say one thing, but you're in fact saying to the court, look, we know the child says that, but for these reasons? And I dare say you've come across that situation.
Yeah, absolutely. The case that Job and I just had recently involved a very young child, and I know Job had a observation session with that child, but of course you get more from children who are older. But all the time it's about best interests, and it's about formulating something from the evidence you have, and basically looking at that evidence and determining what you think is going to be the best outcome for the child. Now, I must say that depends on how good the ICL is, because that ICL needs to gather that information, and without that information, you really got your hands tied behind your back. And I must say that case I just did with Joplin, she had gone down every borough known to man, subpoenaed every document that needed to. I think we had 600 or 700 pages worth of subpoena material. And so by the time we got to court, as a barrister, I was really informed about what was going to be in the best interest for this little girl. Now, Job will tell you from the outset, we thought A should happen. During the trial, we then thought B should happen. And then finally, we came back to something that looked like A. Joplin can probably tell you more about that.
And that often happens, doesn't it, during the course of a trial, even when you're representing a mum or a dad. Let's say you're representing mum and you think, oh, God, dad's case is really solid. And then you hear your client and you think, oh, no, it's okay. She's pretty solid too. So Joplin, you obviously were going through that vacillation, that process of sifting through the evidence and trying to say, gee, have I got this right? Do I back myself here? Have I got this right? Have I really hit on what's the best interest of the child?
And the other thing is that the court wants you to have formed a view. But in the case that Darren's talking about I had a preliminary view, but I wasn't exactly sure because I actually needed to see the parties in the witness box.
Yeah.
I to have my barrister ask them these really pointed questions, so that I could really understand some of the other evidence. So whilst I did have a preliminary view, and then we got some other evidence and we thought, oh God, maybe it hasn't stacked up exactly how we wanted. But then when we had everything together at the last moment, I was able to form that view. And of course, with the help of really great counsel, we put up a very extensive minute of order. But that's what the ICL does, and you don't always know what you're going to do in that final hearing, but you've got all of the evidence, and sometimes you're just waiting for little bits and pieces to come in that you can't.
Yeah, exactly. And in that role, Darren and Joplin, you have to sometimes say to a judge, "Whoa there, hold the horses."
Yeah.
I cannot make up my mind at this stage. Yes, I've got access to the evidence, but you know what, Your Honour, we really need to see this play out. So Darren, I guess that at a final hearing, when the pressure's on, you're the one that stands between the judge and the independent children's lawyer saying, hang on a minute.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's such a team effort, and in where we did it, in the state that this case was heard before a judge, it's unlike Melbourne because the solicitor sits next to you. So I had Joplin sitting next to me, which is a real pain because she kept pulling on my robes the whole time, asking this, asking this.
You need to ask the question, and he's like, stop, I'm getting to it.
Whereas in Melbourne, we have to scribble on bits of paper and sort of shove them across the bar table at the barrister. It really is teamwork, yeah.
So it's a different process, but it struck me how compelling that was sitting next to my instructor. What a team effort it is. Yeah. So it was kind of nice in that setting, and we had to pick up a lot of loose ends without being overcritical of other people sitting at the bar table. There are a few loose ends to be picked up, so we did a lot of heavy lifting, the two of us. But that was all right. That was good because the case was well prepared. We're both on top of it. Job probably much more than me because she'd been living it for a couple of years, and but it worked out really well. And the judge was great. He was very intuitive and asked some really discerning questions, and that helps too, because when it boils down to it, we're all there for one purpose, and that is to have a positive inquiry in terms of what's going to be the best outcome for this little boy or this little girl. Yeah, and that's what's really important. It's not a bucket of mud show. It's working out what's positive for this little girl, Yeah. And I don't know whether Job's done it before, but I know judges always like to know what this little girl or little boy looks like, what they do, what they like, what they don't like, and hopefully as an ICL, we're able to actually paint a picture of this little girl so she becomes more than just one-dimensional.
And the other thing is to be able to do that is you actually have to know the child. You have to know everything about them. You have to know their life, and you have to, if they're little, you have to have, had your conference with them where you've sat, we sat on the ground and we did blocks, and then out the front of my office we had all these Christmas decorations. We went and named the polar bears and all of these sorts of things. But that was really important for me because I got to see her speech. I got to see how she listened to cues, how she interacted with a stranger, with older children, they come in, sometimes they text. I've got one that calls me at the moment. He's really involved, and I really listen to what he says. So it's really important as the ICL that you know the children you're representing.
And Joplin, that's a really important point that you're leading to, and thank you, Darren, for taking us there, because of course we're looking at law reform in relation to the Family Law Act, and if you practice family law long enough, what goes around comes around again. So once upon a time, as independent children's lawyers, we always interviewed or met with the children we were representing. And then some judge got it in his head that, who are we to speak to children? What skills do we have to speak to children? And yet I think that's a vitally important part of the role. So luckily, one of the proposed amendments being initiated by Mark Dreyfus as Attorney General in the Labor government is to ensure that age appropriately we as lawyers meet with the children whose views we don't parrot. So it's really important for the listeners that they understand that we don't stand up and just tell the court what it is that the child wants. We have to meet them. We have to decide, are their views something that we can rely on, bank on, put before the court? Are they being manipulated? Are they not saying what they want? Are they trying to avoid being torn apart in this dispute between mum and dad? So I think this is a step in the right direction to actually say, yes, independent children lawyers can in fact meet with the children whose interests they are putting before the court. So I see that as a positive thing.
We absolutely should. You can't represent someone you don't know.
Absolutely. Now, look, I thought what we might do now.
I think it's curious.
Yeah, sure, Darren.
Yeah. No, I was just going to say, I think it's curious how people are scared of children.
It's true. It's true. And it may well be that the level of sophistication of training for independent children's lawyers perhaps needs to be revisited, particularly if they are going into that situation. But as senior and skilled independent children lawyers, we would often make that decision. Is this a child who's already perhaps been systemically abused? Is this a child perhaps we should not see? Is this a child who's we should only make observations of? Is this a child we really should meet in the presence of a family report writer? So, I agree that if you've got the skills and you're confident about your ability to speak to children, then by all means, provided the training's there and there is no risk to the child and it is in their best interests, that they be heard. And let's not forget, it's part of Australia's international obligations to ensure that the views of children are actually put before the courts or decision makers in relation to those children. So I think what Mark Dreyfus is trying to do is honour those international treaties that we're a signatory to. Now, I thought I'd change tack for a moment, and we don't need to go away from the independent children's lawyer conversation, but we might look at one of our questions that's come in from one of our viewers and see what we think about, what might be happening in this family dynamic.
Sure.
So it reads, "Dear Done and Dusted, I am the mother of 4-year-old daughter Kiara and 9-year-old son Lincoln. Their father and I have been to court and he sees them from Thursday night to Monday morning every other week, from after school through to Thursday night in the off week. So I guess it's Thursday through to Monday in 1 week and then Wednesday overnight in the off week, and half school holidays, which is what you'd expect. We do not have a date for final hearing, and I'm told it could be months away. I'm worried about our 9-year-old, so that's Lincoln the son. When he comes back from access, he won't tell me what happened when his sister and him are with their father. I'm worried because it is likely to be something bad, as Jeff and my son never really got on. Jeff loves his sport and Lincoln does not have very good hand-eye coordination. I ask him what happens at Dad's and he won't respond. I can see he has some bruises and I'm worried things are getting out of hand. Because we have court coming up, I use my iPhone and I record my questions and Lincoln trying not to answer me. I can send you the video. He puts his head down and won't answer me, and that is not like him at all because he's never hidden anything from me. I'm worried that Jeff's patience with Lincoln wears thin. From Rebecca, a concerned mother. Now, the names have been changed, obviously, because we don't want to be breaching Section 121 of the Family Law Act.
Sure.
So let's start with, what do we think's going on for the children. Let's look at this from the kids' perspective. What do we think is going on for them? Little Kiara, age 4, and Lincoln, age 9.
So when I first looked at this problem or question, I just went through how I would approach it if the children were my clients, and I put down, you know, Thursday to Monday with Dad. That's pretty standard at the moment. The court seems to be moving away from the Friday to Sunday or Friday to Monday and making it more block time. He's having the Wednesday in the off week, so the children aren't going a lot of time without seeing Dad. Half school holidays, all pretty standard stuff. I suppose if I saw in an affidavit that Mum was trying to record the child, I'd be concerned with that behaviour from one of the parents, and I would probably highlight that. But it's not unusual, in my experience, that sometimes children just get so overwhelmed. You know, these parents are in court. There's probably quite a bit of conflict. Just, you know, if they could get along, they wouldn't be in court. Lincoln's probably right in the middle of it. He's at that age where he understands that Mum and Dad are divorcing. He's probably had a gutful, to be honest with you, Rebecca, a concerned mum. He's probably just really struggling with things at the moment. That's one lens that you could look at it through. And then I'd look at it through the lens of Mum, who's saying, you know, well, he's got bruises. Well, you know, has she taken him to the doctor in regards to that? You know, is there something else to him shying away and putting his head down? You know, is there something else that could explain that? So I'd just be really unpicking everything that Mum is putting down and trying to figure out, is there some sort of reasonable explanation to this, or is it sinister, which is kind of what she's thinking.
Or is it 9-year-old clumsy klutz, you know, sort of, is it a kid or a muck around kid that, you know, plays outside and
he doesn't have good hand and eye coordination. She says that. So you might expect that he has a few bruises.
And do they happen at Dad's house, or do they happen everywhere? Do they happen at Mum's house? Do they happen out in the street? Do they happen in the playground? So maybe there's a bit of grasping at straws. Darren, what's your view when you stand in court and you have to represent at a final hearing the likes of Kiara and Lincoln? What's going through your head when you read Rebecca's concern?
First of all, did Rebecca consent to this order, or was it imposed on her by the court?
Yeah.
Do we know? We don't know. Because when I read this, I get the impression Rebecca is looking for reasons to reduce the children's time with their dad. That's what I see. It looks like, I know it's only a brief entry from Rebecca, but it looks like she's looking for reasons such as the bruises, such as gathering evidence by way of recording the child. It looks like she's gathering evidence to try and put a case to the court to reduce the father's time. Because if she's not going to the doctors, she's not going to the police, she's actually interviewing this court. I don't know about you guys, but have you ever done a case where a parent's come to you with a recording and it's been positively accepted by the court?
Yeah.
I mean, it usually has a reverse effect, doesn't it?
I know.
Like, truly, what probative value is a video? So it's like happy snaps. It's sort of the same thing with photographs. Oh, look, the child's happy. Yeah. Children are happy.
Yeah, that's right. But you know what's really important in that message? That this poor little boy looks down when his mother's filming him. And you know why? My guess is, it's looking through a particular lens, is because he loves his mum and he loves his dad.
Exactly.
And he doesn't want to tell his mum he's having a good time with Dad.
Exactly.
Because he knows if he does that, it's going to hurt Mum.
And Lincoln's at that age, isn't he, where he's starting to realise who he is, that he's a confidant of Mum and Dad.
Important.
So it's usually when they go to primary school in particular that they start to realise they're part of a family that's bigger than themselves. So it's the first time they usually use a surname. It's the first time they're usually asked to do a family tree. It's the first time that they have this wider view of themselves And that's when they'll often say, look, I've got dad's eyes and I've got mum's, hair or something. Yeah, they realise they are made up of mum and dad, and they want to be at liberty to love both mum and dad. Is that something that resonates with the two of you? They just want to be free to love and spend time with both mum and dad.
I bet if you asked Lincoln, what, if you had 3 wishes, Lincoln, what would you want? And I bet his first thing would be, I just wish mum and dad were back together. Just wish mum and dad had stopped fighting. And I just wish mum and dad had stopped asking me what I do at each of their homes, because it just causes me so much stress.
It's like the emotional hand grenade going off for Lincoln, isn't it? Yeah. So the enemy camp is hurling a hand grenade, and Lincoln is stuck in the middle thinking this is actually going to blow up my face. So instead he just ducks.
You're down. Yeah.
He ducks the cover.
An ICL, if I saw that, I'd be really concerned in relation to, and we don't know, this is only one-sided of the story, of course. So, there might be issues in dad's house, but I'd be really concerned about the pressure mum's putting on Lincoln. I'd be very concerned about what that looks like in the future. And they're the things that we think about. Like if it can't be as easy as Thursday to Monday when mum and dad are doing pickups at school and they're actually not seeing each other, so there's no conflict for the children there. Is someone just looking for some conflict? And how do we negate that in the future for these 2 children?
And the other thing too is, I bet you Kiara's standing next to her mum when she's filming thinking, I'm next to hit the hot seat.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly right. And what am I going to say? That sort of panic, almost when you have to audition for something and you're watching somebody set the stage and you're in the wings. So you're right, Darren. Little Kiara's going, I'm going to be next.
Right for that. He'd be all right for the auditioning.
Yeah, I know. Other two, yeah, that's right. Other two really important things, key messages for parents, I think, are children thrive in a home where there's no stress, and also in a home where they're safe.
Yeah.
So they thrive. They're 2 pretty simple things, and there's a whole bundle of research on that. They're 2 really important things for parents to keep in mind.
And the other thing that they need
how Rebecca and Jeff can end up having a better separation or a better divorce is to literally take the foot off the accelerator of putting these kids under the microscope. Sorry, Joplin, you were going to say.
No, the other thing that I think is that what parents always need to think is, just because they weren't a great husband or just because they weren't a great wife does not mean that they're not a great dad or they're not a great mum, because sometimes the 2 aren't the same. They're interlinked, but they're not necessarily the same. And sometimes things just fizzle out and marriages end, and it's always very stressful and it's hard, but it doesn't have to be so hard for the kids. It just doesn't have to be.
And kids can actually go between 2 disparate households, provided the stress levels are low. So they know that things are different in dad's house compared with mum, but that's not a problem if there's no stress between mum and dad. It's when the stress gets emphasised that everything that happens in dad's house, everything that they do with dad, they're worried about how is that going to translate when they're back in mum's house. Yeah. So the 2 a lot of people think, I don't want to separate because I don't want kids going between 2 households. That ain't the problem. No, it's what you do with the information between the 2 households. It's what you do when the kids are doing different things. You can normalise difference. I've had kids go through religious extremes, for example. One parent is conservative, the other is quite radical in their religious beliefs. Provided there's tolerance of the religious spectrum, not a problem. When there's intolerance, when there's one parent creating a ruckus because mum's health isn't good enough, because mum isn't observant, that's when that becomes very problematic. But kids are very good at adapting, knowing what goes down at dad's and what goes down at mum's need not be a problem unless it's a problem for mum and dad. And I think apart from evidence gathering, there's that element in mum about, I don't know what he gets up to with them.
That's right.
Well, guess what,
Yes.
Rebecca, concerned mother, you may not be entitled to know everything. He's entitled to parent the kids.
Mm.
And just going back to that point that you both made about, well, you know, to what degree has this been brought to anybody's attention? I would have thought that Rebecca, even with us, even with Done and Dusted, Rebecca may have said the police have been involved, the doctor's been involved, there's a general concern. None of that is coming through. So my suspicion is she genuinely has this apprehension about what's going on in Dad's health. But I would love to see her get some support just to let go of that fear. So what's your take on that? What do you think about mum just being unnecessarily fearful about Dad?
I think Daz is frozen, but yeah, I think there's absolutely an element of that. And you know, the first thing that people should always do, don't you agree, when they separate, they should go and get some counselling, because just as when there's a death to your marriage or your relationship, and that's so hard. And I think that parents don't take care of their emotional well-being, and they don't do that. That filters down to the children, and we have a scenario like we have now because mum may not have cared for her emotional well-being, where she's now filming Lincoln, and Lincoln's, you know, distressed, clearly putting his head down, you know, saying everything, but for God's sakes, mum, please stop. I just went to Dad's. You know, but there will come a time when he will articulate that, and that's the, you know, there's all these different stages that kids go through, and you know, maybe he might naturally gravitate and say, look, it's just too hard being in mum's house because I'm constantly getting interrogated. Dad doesn't do that to me.
The interrogation can be really quite terrifying.
Yeah, and that's what this feels like to me.
And he shuts down. That's what the head dip is about. Yeah.
That's right. Absolutely.
Any other final remarks before we wrap up this episode of Done and Dusted?
For me, I'm hoping if parents are listening to this, they get a bit of insight from some of the nuggets we might have dropped along the way. But it's all about, if you're going to both play the game with the kids, if I'm thinking about a baseball pitch, you need to step up to the parental plate. And that's what I think. Priority is important. Yeah.
The thing that I would say to parents is the independent children's lawyer plays a very important role. So if you get a letter from an ICL that says you should attend upon a parenting course, or, you know, alcohol might be an issue and we think that this should happen, or you should get an assessment, don't ignore that, because it does come out. That letter will resurface during cross-examination, and you being flippant 4 or 5 months prior won't serve you well. So the independent children's lawyer is not there for you, not there for the other party. We are there for the children to ensure that their best interest is served. So, you know, play the game.
Yeah.
And I would just finish by saying, don't think about best interest from just your perspective.
No,
Start to stand in the shoes of your children and think truly what they need from you as a parent, and how are they going to get through this separation and divorce as well. Because often parents think about the impact on them. They don't necessarily stop and think about the impact of that separation, that death of the family. And sometimes after death, without sounding too corny, with the right ingredients, you can actually have a rebirth and you can have a better family in the future. So hang in there. Counselling, I think, is one of the big takeaways. Get the counselling, just do it, and make sure that you are the best parent you can possibly be, and park your own fears and concerns and really focus on, well, how are the kids doing? So I'd like to thank Joplin Higgins and Darren Mort. I'm Caroline Counsel, your host on Done and Dusted.